Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, igniting leadership excellence. I'm Rick, and this is my co-host, Emily.
Hi.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Wow.
January 1st. Season 3, episode number 1.
Crazy.
Back in October, we released an episode, and Emily said that she wanted to interview me. It was totally Emily's idea. And when we wrapped up, Emily said, "Hey, I want to continue this so we could talk about your book." And she had a few other questions for me. So as we get started with this here, I want to thank everybody who has been listening. Thank you to those who are tuning in for the first time. Hey, listen, if you're not in the fire service and you're curious what this is about, you don't have to be a firefighter to listen to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, because leadership extends across all professions. And whether it's paid, you're working in a corporation, a fire police department, EMS department, whether you're in the military, working in a nonprofit, church, whatever, leadership extends across all of those and many more. And we can all continue to learn about leadership. I'd like to thank our guests. Last year in September, we started interviewing guests, and our very first one was Chris Robinson, Executive Vice President, Maxwell Certified Leadership Team. And then we also interviewed retired Fire Chief Wayne Kiewicz, retired Colonel Paul Callan, retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, and then retired warrant officer from the Army, Jerry Macklin. So thank you for our guests, and stay tuned for more guests here in 2026. So with that, Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Looking forward to it. So today we are going to focus on questions from your book, The Furnace of Leadership Development: How to Mold Integrity and Character in Today's World. And for those that are watching, this is the book. And it is available on Amazon in audio, ebook, or hard copy. Or if you are here in town, you can meet the author himself and get a personalized copy signed.
Thank you.
So that's a little plug for the book. And for those who are wanting to read more books, if you create those New Year's resolutions, this is a great one to put on your New Year's resolution or your list of books to read this year.
Thank you.
So let's dive right on in. The Furnace of Leadership Development. First, just give us a summary of the book for our listeners, please.
The summary of the book, it starts out, talking about integrity, and then it ends with development of ourselves and development of others. And then we have sandwiched in between the front and the end are other character traits of leaderships and examples, including anger and dealing with disappointment. Two topics that I rarely see pop up in any leadership books. And it's about my experiences in leadership. What I experienced, when I found my dad dead on the floor from his 5th and final heart attack, to those days that the guys essentially took me in at the Cedarville Fire Company, and then all the way up through being a battalion chief at Loveland Fire Rescue, and in between, firefighter in the Air Force, and my time also in the Marine Corps, because I served in both of those branches. So that's a rough summary of the book.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us the story behind the book and why you wrote it.
I think it was probably sometime in the 90s. Deb, my wife, your mom, started saying, "I think you ought to write a book. Have you ever considered writing a book?"
All the way in the 90s.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then as you and Rebecca got older, you would join in with that. You and her would join in with that, saying, "You ought to write a book. You ought to write a book." I got promoted to battalion chief in November of 2005. And I had determined that if I had ever become a battalion chief, I was going to spend time in the fire stations with the crews. And that was something that was lacking from my battalion chief. He'd show up, he'd bring the mail out, and he'd say, "Hey, I want to talk to you out front, Rick." We'd go out front of the firehouse, he'd light up a cigarette, and unfortunately, he'd just bellyache and complain about the fire department and about some of the people on the shift. And And then he'd finish his cigarette and said, "See you later." Uh, he never came out to visit us unless there was a problem. And I know
Hmm.
that there's other chief officers out there. That's the only time they show up too, is when there's a problem. So I
That's not good.
determined that's poor leadership.
Yeah.
Hey, you chief officers, if you're a regular listener to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, you know that you need to be in the stations with the crews, and not just the stations where your friends and your buddies are at. And avoiding the ones where you're afraid to answer the tough questions. You're a
Mhm.
chief officer. That's your job. Get out there. Get out there into those stations.
Yeah.
So, Emily, as I started that habit, that pattern of going out to the fire stations, yeah, certainly passing on official information to them from our chiefs meetings, but the primary intent was to get to know them. Who are they? Who are their families? So they could get to know me and learn how I operate
Yeah.
beyond just the scene of an emergency. And so guys were starting to say, "Chief, you need to write this stuff down. You need to write it down." And coming over, "Chief, you need to write this stuff down." So we got into 2017, and Deb and I were talking one evening, and she was saying, "Hey, I heard an interview on the radio, KCOL, local radio station, and the guy was interviewing a lady who has a company where she helps people publish books." And I said, "Do you remember this lady's name or the name of the company?" And she was piecing together a name, and she said, "I think her name was Polly." And so I jumped on the internet and I did a search, and I said, "Polly Latovsky?" She said, "Yeah, that's her." I clicked on the link to her website, and this was a Wednesday evening, and she had an events tab, and I looked and I said, "Hey, she's got a lunch and learn tomorrow down in Denver called Self Publishing 101. Let's go." And fortunately, that was one of our regularly scheduled Thursdays for Chiefs meetings, but it had been canceled.
Hmm.
It
Wow.
had been canceled that day. And so I signed both of us up. We went down to the restaurant there in Denver, and there was, I don't know, maybe 15 people in there. And Susie Schaefer, who was working with Polly at the time, both of them went through it. And afterwards, Deb and I talked to both Polly and Susie. And next thing I know, we're standing out in the parking lot. And I said, "Sounds like I'm writing a book."
Wow.
And that is how that got started.
Yeah. Well, you kind of stepped into the next question. So, briefly explain the self publishing journey.
Yeah. Well, folks, you could self-publish a book, or you could go with one of the larger publishing houses.
Hmm.
And what sold me on the self-publishing aspect is Polly had been burned big time by a publisher. And when I learned the nuances of what takes place in the publishing world, such as they own it. If you go with one of the bigger publishing houses, it's theirs. They own that stuff. I own everything in my book. I, you know, I can continue to print this thing as long as I want. Big publishing house,
Yeah.
they say we're done, and then it's out of print, and it's difficult to find it after that. There's a lot of other benefits to self-publishing as well. I was in the driver's seat with this, and I like that. I like being in the driver's seat. And so self-publishing doesn't mean, well, for some people it does mean they're putting out their piece of crap. But there was no way I was going to do that. So Polly uh, had me working with Susie. And a few months into that process, Susie had to return home to California, and Polly helped her start her own company. And Polly said, "Rick," she said, "it's up to you. Do you want to stick with Susie, or I could take over your project? I don't know where it's at. I don't know what's going on because Susie's been working on it." And I said, "Well, I just as soon stick with Susie." And so it was great working with Susie. Her company is called Finish the Book. Uh, Finish the Book Publishing. And She took care of all the behind the scenes things.
Hmm.
I had a writing coach who also turned into my first editor. Susie got things lined up with a copy editor, with a person who would do the interior layout and how all of that looked, got
Yeah.
me tied in with a graphic artist to do the cover. There was an entire team that worked with this. And so one of the other key people besides Susie in publishing the book is Alexandra O'Connell.
Yeah.
She was my writing coach and my first editor. Alexandra's a Jersey girl, you know. And so when Polly first introduced us to Alexandra, Deb and I drove down to Denver. We met her for a cup of coffee, and we clicked right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I loved working with Alex. I loved working with everybody, everybody that was involved with the book.
Hmm. Oh, you stopped bad timing as I was taking a taking a sip of my tea. That's so cool how that transpired. How long did it take you from the time that you started writing the book to publishing? Like, what was the timeline with that?
Well, it was August of 2017 when I had my first meeting, when we had our first meeting with Alexandra.
Yeah.
And she had two programs. She had a full-blown coaching program, which was quite expensive, or she had a DIY, do-it-yourself program. And that was all based off of the author and their writing style and how well they wrote.
Mm.
And so she said, I want to see anywhere between 20 to 25 pages. And she said, if you want to consider this the first chapter of your book, go ahead. And she said,
Mm.
but this is going to determine whether or not you could do the DIY program or, the full blown coaching program.
Oh, so she's the one who determined it
Yeah.
then. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Uh-huh. And so it was during that time, we went off on vacation and I started writing. And it was September of 2017 when
Mm.
I shipped that 25-page document off to Alexandra,
Yeah.
and she was right on top of it. And a day later, she said, yeah, you could do the DIY
Hmm. Cool.
DIY program. And so what that involved is, when we set it up, is that I would write a chapter a month,
Hmm.
and then I would submit that to Alexandra. She would go over it and she would send it back with her tips on, what I needed to improve, making sure that, how I was writing in the third person, using action words, action verbs, and not writing in a passive sense.
Mm.
And then for the first 5 months in big, I mean, big, big, bold red letters, do not edit, keep writing.
Hmm.
And her philosophy was is that if I got back what she was sending me and I went in and decided to do the editing, I'd probably still be editing today,
Wow.
right now.
Yeah.
And she said, we will edit when you're finished writing.
Kind of like that concept of just like bleeding on the paper,
Exactly.
right?
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. So I want everybody to know I never wrote while I was on duty.
Mm.
Same thing when I was at the Executive Fire Officer program at the National Fire Academy doing the applied research project. I would do research late at night in the
Mm.
firehouse, but I never wrote. I never wrote my research papers on duty, and I never wrote my book on duty. And I know that there are some out there that do that, but for me, uh, from an ethical standpoint, it's like I'm not going to write a book. I'm not going to write a book while I am on duty. I just find that unethical.
Mhm.
And so with that philosophy and that approach, and then being on duty, coming off duty, and having to do on-call duty, that really limited the amount of time I could write.
Yeah.
And so consequently, the writing carried all the way up to March of 2019 when I finished, and that's when we began the editing process. And Alexandra said, hey, I want you and Deb to read this out loud to each other.
Oh, yeah.
And so we did. We took turns, chapters, reading it out loud and found mistakes, found thoughts that were incomplete, found things. It's like, where in the world was I going with this? We even found some sentences like they were never finished. And
Mm.
so once we had done that twice, then I sent it down to Alexandra so she could do the editing process. She sent it back. I made those changes and we read it out loud. Deb and I did again, sent it back
Yeah.
to Alexandra, and then went to the copy editor, and that was the absolute final part of that. Then and at the same time, we was working um, with a fella, Nick Zellinger, up in Estes Park, who did the cover, and Michelle White down in Florida, who was doing all the interior layout. Susie was taking care of these things in the background, working with the Library of Congress, which, hey, I'm happy that my book is in the Library of Congress. She was
Yeah.
working with getting it set up on Amazon, taking care of all of that stuff. Got me tied in with a printer, Steuben Press down in Longmont. And she took care of all of that stuff to where we were able to launch the book. The first proof copies came in October of 2019, which that was something else. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I'm holding my book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we did the launch on November 2nd of
Yeah.
2019. We had that launch
That's
party,
right.
and
Yeah.
quite a few people showed up for that. We had
That
books,
was really
did the
cool.
book signing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how that process occurred. And then also at the same time, when Susie was getting that set up with Amazon, it got turned into an ebook. And then it was 2024. Yes, working with a lady here in Loveland, Karen Fournier. And she worked with me on another DIY project for the audiobook that
Mm-hmm.
I narrated the book myself.
Yeah. Which is so cool that you narrate it yourself because people can hear the Jersey accent. It's not just some boring person reading your book who
Yeah.
doesn't have like the
Yeah.
inflections and that Jersey accent that people like really need to hear for reading the book. So we're going to dive deep into the book. So I have a couple questions about
Sure.
that. I'd like to read to our listeners the back of your book. So it says, in the absence of leadership, decisiveness vaporizes, indecision rules, and talent walks out the door. Do you feel your leadership skills don't measure up? Have you been left with the impression that leadership is an easy path? Are you afraid to ask questions about leadership for fear others will think less of you? Join Rick at the Firehouse kitchen table for a cup of coffee and insight into the challenges that leaders face. You'll learn the pain and rewards of integrity, the need for strong relationships to build trust, why organizational monsters are created, to embrace the chaos of decision making, how to develop a leadership action plan, and so much more. Dive into the furnace, become a leader with character, and take action when others won't. So that's just the summary of the back of the book for those of you who've either not read it or have read it. And then just the table of contents is there's 11 chapters, and the first chapter is on the foundation of integrity. It's trust and credibility. Once again, inheriting an organizational monster. And for those that listen to our podcast, that one probably does sound familiar because we definitely have talked about that one more in depth as well. An unhealthy team conflict, shedding bias towards subordinates, the consuming fire of anger, the positives and negatives of determination, and like you already talked about, disappointment, decision making, a wise investment, and then the title of the book, The Furnace of Leadership Development. So, after going through that, what was your favorite chapter to write about and why?
Well, before I answer that question, we interviewed Paul Callan, and he appeared on the podcast back in November of 2025. And I got to know Paul at the end of 2013 when I was the training chief.
Yeah.
Paul's a retired Marine Corps officer. He was a colonel. I was introduced to Paul by another retired Marine Corps officer, Travis Tebby. And when Travis was a helicopter pilot in the Corps, and when he separated, he came here to Loveland and was working in dispatch. That's how I got to know him. And it was Travis that ultimately got me connected with Paul. And we had brought Paul in here at Loveland Fire to do leadership training. And as I got to know him, Paul was mentoring me in certain aspects of leadership. And then as our relationship developed, I asked Paul, hey, would you be willing to write the foreword to my book? And he said, absolutely. And so I'm very grateful to Paul for doing that. It
Yeah.
means a lot to me that he did it. And it means a lot to me that seeing as how I served the two branches of the military, the Air Force, and then over the Marine Corps, it means a lot to me to have a Marine Corps colonel, a career officer, write that forward.
Yeah.
And so that's a favorite part. But your question is, what was the favorite chapter that I wrote?
Yeah. Or I guess the one you're most passionate about,
The
if you can't pick a favorite.
Yeah, there's several of them that are favorite. I would think that there's two of them that definitely fall into the category that I am most passionate about. The
Yeah.
first one would be chapter one,
Yep.
where I wrote about integrity,
Yeah.
because I firmly believe that if a person does not have integrity, hey, they're on shaky ground. And we can see it all around us all the time. I don't care how educated, how smart, how athletic, how big, how short, how skinny, how fat, men, women, I don't care. Because if you don't have integrity, none of that means anything. I don't care if you are the fire chief of a large city fire department. If you have no integrity, you got nothing.
Yeah.
Or if you're a fire chief or a lieutenant in a small volunteer fire department, if you don't have integrity, you got nothing.
Yeah.
And we certainly see that in our political world out there today.
Oh yeah.
And it's just such a sad thing that I see. I get the daily news feed that comes in from Fire Engineering Magazine. And some of the things that I see, Emily, that are out there just in the fire service, not even any place up, a fire service, the lack of integrity. And unfortunately, what happened here back in 2025 to pop up on the news in a city south of us, where a battalion chief was arrested for sexual assault.
Mm.
And hey, yeah, that's a crime. That's a lack of integrity.
Yeah.
That's definitely a lack of integrity. So I am certainly passionate about that. The other one would be the last two chapters of the book, where I talk about personal and professional development. And that's something that I will not budge on.
Yeah.
Hey, you listen to this podcast, then you're probably interested in personal and professional development. But what about the people that you work with? Where are they at? If you are in a supervisory position, regardless of your fire, police, EMS, military, or some civilian position, what are you doing to improve the people that are working for you? What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you attending? And I encourage you to get out from underneath your specific profession and look to what others, pardon me, are writing, saying, podcasting, teaching about leadership. I'm a member of the John Maxwell Certified Leadership Team, and a highlight of 2025 for me was attending the semi-annual, it's called the International Maxwell Certification, the semi-annual event down in
Yeah.
Orlando, Florida, that for 4 days. Just unbelievable, absolutely fantastic. And then in September of 2025, Gary Barnes, who has been my coach, I attended his Master Breakthrough Boot Camp. I might have had those words twisted around a little bit, but I've known Gary now since 2022. And then every other week, I sit in on his mastermind with others. And that's a great from a developmental standpoint. I attend a weekly roundtable. I attend a monthly lunch and learn
Mhm.
through Kingdom Way Ministries, and then I'm part of a men's cohort through Kingdom Way Ministries, where we meet once a month. And so that all falls into that development, that personal professional development. And so
Yeah.
I'm a very strong advocate for that, because folks, it really does need to go beyond just turning on a podcast and listening to the podcast. What else are you ingesting? And as John Maxwell says, be a river, not a reservoir. Don't just be the individual that just continues to read, continues to listen to podcasts, or continues to go to seminars, and then you never do anything with it.
Yeah.
Give out, add value to people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you who have read the book or even listen to our podcast, you hear the name Joe Schmuckatelli a lot. So, how did Joe Schmo originate?
Joe Schmo or Joe Schmuckatelli?
Well, which one is he in the book? Is she
He's
Schmuckatelli or is
Schmuckatelli.
she
Yeah,
Schmo?
it's Joe Schmuckatelli. For those of you who are in or were in the Marine Corps, you're familiar with Joe Schmuckatelli. Joe Schmuckatelli would pop up in a number of areas. Could be in an infamous manner, being used in a not so glorious form, or it could just be, yeah, we got Joe Schmuckatelli down there, just like any other schmo walking down the street. And so, yeah, famous Joe Schmuckatelli, and the famous to, you know, probably a majority of Marines that are walking the face
Huh,
of the earth right now.
did
So
not know that.
that's where Joe originated from, Emily.
I just thought he originated from your brain.
No, 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 that's not original to me. Who knows? I mean, because the Marine Corps, the military is full of legends, and the Marine Corps certainly is full of its own set of legends. So I've never done the research and dug into,
Hmm.
okay, where did Joe Schmuckatelli originate?
Yeah. Wow. Well, wrapping up, like, what was your favorite part of writing the book altogether?
Completion.
Mm. Yeah.
It is a laborious
Yeah.
process. And when I was on call, I went right because I
Hmm.
did not want to be interrupted. When I came off duty, I never wrote on the day that I came off duty because I was physically and mentally
Exhausted.
tired and drained. And so I would always write, the next day. And Alexandra, my writing coach, she had said, set yourself a word limit, Rick. That way, if you have a writing block, you know that you can crank out. So I set a word limit of 750 words. And I think there was only
Mhm.
one time throughout that entire writing process where I, hit that as my minimum. Generally, I was going way above that. Oh, something else that I forgot to add is in between the chapters are short stories
Mm.
that
Yeah.
are personal stories that are related to that chapter. But
That's great.
that satisfaction of the process is done.
Hmm.
It's off to Steuben Press. It's off to KDP, which is part of
Yeah.
Amazon, and then waiting for the proof copies to come back. They're both here from KDP and from Steuben. We're good to go. And so it was that satisfaction of knowing we've put the time, the effort, and our own money into publishing
Yeah.
this book under the name of Java House Publishing.
Yes.
Java, our dog.
It's famous.
And yeah, we had the logo drawn up by a lady
Yeah.
here in Loveland, Chelsea Hoffman. One night I was on duty. Deb was doing a ladies' Bible study here at the house, and Emily sent me a picture of Java sitting on the arm of our couch, and our friend Becky was there. And Java, you could see Becky's right arm and part of her Bible, and Java's sitting there looking down on the Bible. And so we showed Chelsea that picture, and
Hmm.
the logo has a Bible on it with Java and a cup of coffee with
Yeah.
steam coming coming off of that.
It's so cute. I love it. So I'm sure people want to know this, and you get asked this a lot. Is there a second book
I have
on
given
the
that a
horizons?
lot of thought. I really have. I've been writing the blog on a weekly basis ever since January of 2020.
Yeah.
So now we've got 6 years of blogs that are
Yeah.
out there. I've even had a suggestion, and I really like it for a title of a book. I'm not going to mention that
Oh.
for two reasons. Because if I do go, I want it to be my title.
Yeah.
And I don't want somebody to be listening and say, "Oh, I like that title," and then they use that, and
Right.
it's unfortunate, but we've got those type of people,
Yep.
walking around the face of the earth.
Yep.
Will I do it? I don't know.
Hmm.
I just don't know, Emily.
Yeah.
There's there is quite a financial investment that is involved
Yeah.
with writing the book. But I do know the value of the books. When I went to the IMC last August, on the second day of the IMC, Mark Cole, the president, he was up there with Chris Robinson on the stage, and they both started talking about books because Chris had just finished his book From Drift to Drive.
Mhm.
Well, somebody out of the audience, and I don't know how many thousands of people were at the event. Somebody ran up and they gave Mark a copy of his book. And then out of the audience, people are running up and
Wow.
and it's like, oh man,
You could have
I
done
know I could
that.
have done that. I got copies up in the room, in the
Oh,
hotel room, and in the end, I think they wound up between that Monday and that Tuesday of people in the
mm,
opening session of those days bringing up books. I think I heard Mark say they have 41 books.
wow.
Yeah, 41 books that were brought up there.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that are writing that, and I'm tying that into your question. Is there not? Yeah, there's another book inside of me. There may
Yeah.
be another two books that are
Yeah.
inside of me. I got no problem writing.
Hmm.
I love to write. You know that.
Gifted.
Yeah, because I'm doing the blog. I'm
Hmm.
doing the newsletter for Christian firefighters on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And I sit down and I write the outline for the lesson on Sundays for the singles connection group.
Yeah.
So,
That's true.
mm,
Well, to be determined.
yeah, to be determined. Hey, if there's anybody out there who says, "Oh, Rick, I feel sorry for you. I'd like to help you out." Hey, my contact information is in the show description. If you want to write a check, I'm not going to turn that down.
Donate it to Rick's Book
Yeah.
Fund. Well, to wrap up, once again, the book is called The Furnace of Leadership Development and is available on Amazon, ebook, and audio. And do you have any other closing thoughts as we end this podcast?
Well, my closing thoughts again, folks. This was Emily's idea.
Yeah.
The first time she interviewed me, where the podcast aired in October, and then she said, "Let's finish this up, with your book." And so, I appreciate, Emily, wanting to do that. Uh, Actually, this podcast was Emily's idea.
Hmm.
And she said, "Hey, Dad, why don't we do a podcast?" I had talked to a friend of mine about doing a podcast, but he's in a different industry. His interests were completely, totally different than mine. And so it never panned out. And then Emily said, "Dad, let's do a podcast together." So we did the research to see what it would take, and bang, here we are into season 3. So I'm
Yeah.
very appreciative of Emily doing that. Emily has her own business, folks, called Emily's Delights. Emily makes cake pops.
Yep.
And the only downfall to what she does is she's operating under the Colorado Home Cottage. Is that the correct
Mhm.
name of it? Yeah.
Yep.
And she's not, by law, she can't ship out of state.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're great. And so Emily's a baker. She does a fantastic job with that with her own business. And Emily has worked in human resources in another city as well. So
Yeah.
Emily's got a lot of experience out there, and also God has blessed her with a lot of wisdom. So my website is in the show notes. Please check the website out. You can see the services that I have to offer, the seminars that I could teach, and then also I love coaching and mentoring firefighters on a one-on-one basis, and you can see the leadership assessments that I have that are available to you.
Yeah.
So those would be my closing thoughts. Emily, anything for you?
No, I think this was a great episode. And once again, just go out and get his book, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, folks, and we'll see you later. So long.
Bye.